Hi, my name is Susan Alt, and I'll be presenting on my research that was generously funded by the Senator Malcolm Wallop Civic Engagement Program and is titled Small-Scale Ecotourism and Conservation in Chile and Patagonia, and examined the motivation, goals, and impacts on environmental protection, economic development, and cultural autonomy. So once again, my name is Susan Alt, and I'm a master's student in International Studies and Environment and Natural Resources. This research topic was developed through interest in South America as well as spending significant time in South America. In my undergraduate career and my graduate career, I started to notice what seemed to me to be an uptick in these small-scale ecotourism projects, so I decided I wanted to focus my research on these projects. So a little bit of an introduction. Prior to beginning this research, I did a lot of background research on the current situation in Chile and Patagonia and found that large-scale ecotourism and conservation projects are typically economically and environmentally unsustainable, which is a little contradictory because they are ecotourism. You would think that they would be environmentally sustainable, but a lot of times they actually have negative impacts on the environment and can be very damaging to local cultural identities, but they are still a very prominent form of ecotourism and conservation in the region. In Chile and Patagonia specifically, I found significant literature pointing to government mismanagement of resources, as well as foreign influence in the region, typically in the forms of Norwegian, Canadian, and American salmon farms, which were causing damage to the environment and the local culture as well. And this all led to limited local land access, exploitation of the culture of local people, and a disregard for traditional practices. So it seemed to me that in response to these negative impacts of traditional forms of tourism, of large-scale tourism, ecotourism, the local people began to develop small-scale ecotourism and conservation projects of their own. So my research questions were, what were the motivations behind the development of small-scale ecotourism and conservation projects? And what are the goals of these projects? Are they succeeding? And how are these small-scale ecotourism and conservation projects influencing environmental protection, economic development, and cultural autonomy? So in order to conduct this research, I traveled to Chiloé, Chile, which is a group of islands off the coast of Chiloé. It's on the north end of Chile and Patagonia, so it's known as the north of the south, because it's the northernmost part of the southern region of Chile. And I conducted semi-structured interviews. I had intended to get around 30 semi-structured interviews, but because I was only able to go in the low season, there was a lot of people who weren't available to meet, who weren't on the island, and just some other circumstances made it so I was only able to get 8. I also took part in participant observation, where I functioned as a participant as observer. So what this means essentially is that I took part in conservation activities, working on organic farms, took part in ecotours, and kind of gathered information through this interaction as well. And I also utilized document analysis, which was analyzing brochures, posters, flyers, graffiti, pretty much any kind of written or graphic examples in the region that would contribute towards my research. So my first major finding was that a lack of trust in the Chilean government, coupled with feelings of inadequate resource and environmental protections, are significant motivations to the development of small-scale ecotourism and conservation initiatives in Chiloé, Chile. So basically, this finding is arguing that the lack of trust in the government is one of the main reasons for the development of these projects. So the lack of trust in the government was noted by both Camilla and Mateus. Camilla stated that the government is preoccupied with money and the economy and wants more money at the expense of Chilean resources. There was also repeated critiques of the salmon farms in the region, as you can see by the graffiti, "Escucha salmonera, no somos tu basurero," which essentially means, listen salmon farms, we are not your trash can. And this was a note towards the environmental damage the salmon farms are causing. And this reflects that this lack of trust in the government to have environmental protections in their best interest is leading towards the development of these projects. And there's also belief that the government only operates for profit. The second half of this argument is feelings of inadequate environmental protections. So Renata stated that there is not much environmental protection in the region except for the big parks. This sentiment was reflected again and again by the interviewees who cited the big national parks as being the only protected areas and being inadequate. The feelings of resource exploitation was also really embodied in the description of the Chacao Channel Bridge, which is a bridge project proposed by the government to build a suspension bridge between Chiloé, the island, and the mainland of Chile. And the people see this as just another effort to exploit the resources easier on the island. So as Amanda stated, the rest of the big island of Chiloé is being exploited by leaps and bounds with the excessive removal of natural resources from the earth and sea, which are vital to the health of the island. So all of this has led to a feeling of responsibility amongst the local people. In the words of Mateus, it seems that the government should protect the land, but in the reality is that the government is not doing anything. So the people and the communities in the region must do it instead. So my second finding looked at the goals, successes, and impacts of these projects. So the overarching goal, according to the interviewees, was to achieve environmental, economic, and social sustainability in their projects. I'll also lead into a discussion on the impacts on environmental protection, economic development, and cultural autonomy as well. So the first part of this finding was environmental sustainability as a goal. And this was very prevalent at an organic farm in Ancud, which is in the northern region of Chiloé, or the north end of the Big Island, with one of the owners stating that she wants to use their land in a sustainable manner. And this was very evident through their use of water storage tanks, native forest restoration, greenhouses, farming of native animals and native crops, and just using all of their resources in a sustainable manner. It was also evident in various ecotourism companies that I talked to. According to Nicholas, he stated that we combine tourism with conservation and protection of natural resources on our land, again showing that this environmental sustainability is very important. And as far as the impact on environmental protection, there is a slight impact on environmental protection at the very small local scale, but there didn't seem to be much impact on the bigger scale. According to Nicholas, he states it would be very, very difficult to have a significant impact on the policies that protect or do not protect our environment and our natural resources, but he does think it has an impact at the small scale. And a big part of this is because, as the interviewees repeatedly stated, they would have to change how the government thinks in order to have an impact at the large scale. The second part of this finding had to do with economic sustainability, and this was seen mostly through the goal of providing alternative economic opportunities for local people, as well as developing self-sufficiency and being long-term economically stable. So most of these projects typically employed only local people if they did employ people at all. Otherwise, they were independently run, and that's where that self-sufficiency aspect came in. As far as an impact on economic development, they seem to be having a positive impact on economic development in the region. The projects were seen as economically viable. One example of this was a penguin tour on the north end of the island in Ancud. So this company is a cooperative or a co-op run by multiple families, so that multiple families and multiple members of the community can benefit from this one small project. And the interviewees also pointed to the economic development of suppliers. So some of the companies that maybe need food or transportation as a part of their company cited prompt payments, regulation of their activities, and a preference for local suppliers, which contributes to that economic development in the region as well. And the third part of this finding was social sustainability, and this was mainly discussed through how interviewees were interacting with their community and with visitors, with the goal of educating visitors being the main overarching part of social sustainability. So an eco resort stated that they wanted to promote the respect of the traditions and ethical rights of local communities on the island, and multiple interviewees stated that they want to educate visitors about the region, about ecotourism practices, about sustainable travel. And this is seen in the quote by Renata, who states, "We want to know people from other places and to teach them about our project and about sustainability. So maybe they will help the communities here and at their home to live in a more sustainable way." So this also had an impact on cultural autonomy and cultural retention, leading to an increase in cultural autonomy and retention in the region as well. So again, Renata states that when we meet people from outside this region, it is good because we can share our culture and the Chilote identity with people who want to learn about culture and our lives. And Amanda, in regards to cultural retention, stated that these projects provide an opportunity to work to preserve and conserve their cultural heritage. So this research is both theoretically and practically significant. At a theoretical level, it contributes to current literature on political ecology and conservation. It also addresses a significant gap in the research, pointing to the motivations of small-scale ecotourism projects and the impacts of them, specifically in the region of Chiloé, which typically seems to be a pretty overlooked region unless literature is talking about the salmon farms. And it also contributes to lit on social ecological theories, as well as the best practice for sustainable ecotourism and conservation, not only in Chiloé, but in other regions of the world as well. In a practical sense, it's significant because it did identify a lack of trust in the government as a motivating factor for these projects. So if this lack of trust in the government is acknowledged, potentially it can start to be addressed. If the people's voices are heard, maybe the government will start to take the opinions of the local people more into account and have a more collaborative relationship with those local people. I also think that my research reflects an accurate representation of the people. A lot of the news articles written about the region present a very mystical, kind of condescending view of the local people that's frankly pretty offensive. So I really tried to write my research in an accurate portrayal of the people and how they perceive themselves. So I'm hoping this can start to change the perception of the people in this region as well. And it also discusses the concepts of nature and wilderness within our everyday lives. So typically in North America and in Western countries, we see nature and wilderness as separate from people. So I hope if people read this, they'll start to see more of that interaction and how people and nature are never truly separate. As far as future directions for myself, this research has really been in my area of interest of ecotourism, conservation, and just international travel and international studies in general. So I'm hoping to work in a study abroad department and to be able to work as either a study abroad advisor or director, and to encourage sustainable travel practices within study abroad programs as well. And I would again like to offer my thanks to the Senator Malcolm Wallop Civic Engagement Program and the Turner Foundation, whose generous funding in part made this research possible. And I'd also like to extend my thanks to my committee members, who were Dr. Zoe Pearson, Dr. Nicholas Crane, Dr. Chelsea Escalante, and Richard Verco for all of their help and support throughout this project. Thank you.